This was an incredibly close matchup between the two teams before, and both teams left something to be desired in that first Underrot. So we're going to have to see, with all the experience they've had of running through this entire bracket at this point, whether or not they're going to be able to clean up their run in this dungeon.
And let's keep in mind here, we're in a bolstering environment, so any mob that dies, any trash mob that dies, will buff every enemy around it by 20% of max HP, and of course 20% damage. So you want to make sure to kill things at around the same time and maintain and sustain the health differences properly.
And something to remember here from Abrakeydabra, they play Horde in this dungeon for those Arcane Torrent AoE dispels on the skeleton packs later in the dungeon, so we're going to have to see, once again, if that comes into play. They definitely have kind of crafted their strategy around using those torrents, so, I mean, we're definitely going to have to look and see what that does for them in this run if they're able to be clean.
Yeah, a lot of teams don't really, when interviewing, they didn't really think, or they didn't construct many strategies around Alliance in this dungeon, just because having those Arcane Torrent dispels, as you mentioned, on the Guardians after Krag'wa is a pretty big deal. Abrakeydabra finally finishing off their trash. Both teams have indeed committed their bloodlust here. 13% on the board for them as Team D has finished up their remaining 13% and will be heading down, 14%, excuse me, and will be heading down over towards the first boss.
Yeah, and of course, the thing to mention about being Horde, of course, the main thing, since you're not Alliance, you don't have that Shadow Meld available to you. So anything that you pull, unless it's on a rogue, you're stuck in combat with it. You can't drop that combat. So that's why we see both of these teams, especially Abrakeydabra, making sure they're dealing with this mask. They're going to proc, both teams actually, going to proc their first Reaping Wave and AoE it down with this first boss. Now, it is a fortified setting, right? So the boss isn't going to be that dangerous, but any errant Blood Bolt cast going off from the boss could be a death.
It hits the tank very hard, even in a fortified environment. I can attest to you, especially when I try to call for someone's interrupt and they don't listen to me, and it hits me in the face. But speaking of procs here, we have Ashine's Cheat Death proc as well, so he's not going to have that available. Fortunately, not really any too dangerous DPS damage coming out until we get to the Screamers, of course, in the next room. But before that, we have to defeat Elder Liaxa, something that Abrakeydabra is about 12% ahead on over Team D.
Yeah, they definitely just were able to deal with the trash a little bit quicker than Team D was. And, something that might actually end up being is the Horde ratios kind of tend to be a little bit higher DPS because they're Blood Elf. They also have that passive crit as well, which is pretty good for the Outlaw Rogue as well as the Windwalker Monk. So that could be a little bit extra damage, but generally speaking, that's a pretty small thing in the grand scheme of things. They're just having better execution so far in the dungeon.
Pretty small indeed. And finally, the last couple of Brave Bolts go out for Team D. A bit of a chunking damage on Baby Pig earlier because 3 of them managed to connect with them while he had one of the Reaping Soul stacks as well. But no harm done from them. But unfortunately, unfortunately for them, that is, Abrakeydabra has pulled ahead by another 10%, and they're good 20% ahead on this boss right now, looking to finish it off. Bolt goes off, and they were getting ready with a Spell Reflect, one final one from Divine Field there. Huge amount of chunking damage reflected back into the boss's face as they mount up and get ready to go right into the heart of Krag'wa's room. And Zyro, this room is really where we see a lot of teams, I mean, even in Method and A, we constantly have talked about it, a lot of teams struggle in this room because they overpull and overcommit, and there are just such dangerous trash mobs in here.
Yeah, I mean, the way you pull this room, especially in this speedrun environment, is you only have 4 melee interrupts available to you. If you pull more than that, more than that many mobs that need to be interrupted, you're going to have a bad time in here. You're going to have to be like, oh, I want to let a Sonic Screech go through, or I want to let one of these stuns from the Lashers go through and heal through it. They just have to make sure that they're keeping their CC, keeping their interrupts on cooldown, making sure that they're getting all of the important interrupts, and as long as they go through that, I think Abrakeydabra should have this.
Certainly don't want a French fry when you're meant to pizza that is going to cause a bad time. Swag here is fixated by one of the Blood Swarmers right now. We can see that red eye icon on the party frames at the top. A lot of damage coming in on the Divine Field. Keep in mind, this is a pretty substantial pull. All of these lingering mobs at low health are getting a 20% damage buff every time one of their allies dies. So a lot of tank damage by the end of it all, even if it is from the Living Rots, which are really kind of non-mobs and non-concerns in this scenario, but they start to certainly become concerns right now.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of talking about the team so much, we forgot to talk about the affixes of the dungeon. Fortified Bolstering by itself is one of the nastiest combos available out there. Just extra trash damage plus exponentially increasing trash damage whenever you kill something is bad enough, but add in Quaking on top of that, you're guaranteed taking 25% of your health almost every 20 seconds. This is nasty.
This is nasty and it's mean, and this is actually a double Bloodswarmer pull here from Team D. This is incredibly dangerous. Not only do they have the Sonic Screech cast that you cannot commit all of your interrupts to because there are at least 2 Lashers in the group right now, so they'll have to babysit those well, but the double damage of focus coming out for the two teams right now is extremely dangerous. Not just that, but you want to keep them centralized on top of the other mobs so you can cleave them down in this all-melee comp, and they're starting to kite them around in circles, not to mention the area denial from those Living Rots on the ground. Baby P taking a huge chunk of damage damage, dipping to 11% health right now, and the defensive Ring of Peace comes down from Yusheng, just trying to buy some time for these rogues, as finally the fixate goes off of Baby Pig and re-fixates on Mog instead.
Yeah, but the dangerous thing is one of those Bloodstormers going down just buffs the other one, but fortunately they're able to kill the second one before it really gets any melees off onto Yusheng. So, making sure they're keeping their priority damage proper, making sure they're doing a good job of that. That was one of the things we kept saying Abrakeydabra was doing incredibly well in the last dungeon. I mean, so many bad things happened in the King's Rest, but priority damage was something Abrakeydabra was doing incredibly well, making sure they're DPSing down the important targets, not just mindlessly AoEing things down. As long as they can continue to do that, they're doing a pretty good job so far.
There certainly is a priority of danger with the mobs in this room, with the highest being the Bloodstormer on the rest of the group. Ashine dipping quite low here, but Abrakeydabra has now dealt with their second Reaping Wave in this room and is sitting pretty at 53% trash, whilst Team D is now combined their second Reaping Wave along with a pretty substantial trash pull here. Divine Field grabbing the rest of this room right now and trying to cleave it down as another Quaking pulses the group, which happens every 20 seconds or so.
Yeah, no, now Abrakeydabra is doing a double Bloodstormer pull of their own, and Underrot has both of the fixates right now, so he's going to have to make sure he does not get meleeed by either of those. That's why you see the Ring of Peace coming down to make sure the Bloodstormers don't get out of range. The Bloodstormers kind of have a little nuance to them, actually. If you stay in kind of a middling range, they won't ever charge to you. They'll just kind of start running towards you, but if you run too far, they will charge at you and melee you. So you are able to actually kite them around, but the problem with kiting them around is you're not having full uptime on them. So they're not getting AoE down, they're not getting cleaved down in the group, so you don't necessarily want to be kiting them around. That's kind of an unfortunate, circumstance for them.
Yeah, you have to kind of find the nice balance of how long can I stay in to help everyone DPS before I potentially get killed, or it's just too much for my healer to heal me. 55% trash on the board for Abrakeydabra right now as they look to finish up the remaining percentage that they need to likely proc their third round of Reaping, which they will, as quickly as they can, drag into Krag'wa and get started on the boss. Here go the last two rots right now, 63% for them, and they waste no time as they rush in and grab Krag'wa over to the side. Divine Field getting ready to thunderclap his woes away and grab all of these Reaping mobs and cleave it down effectively on top of the boss. Team D just clean run from them right now, but just slow. A bit of mismanagement from the Bolstering. We can see the sheer size of the Lasher on the screen right now, because the Bolstering does make, aesthetically, all of the mobs grow in size too.
Yeah, and I think this might be one of the things they were talking about when they said that their strategies weren't really top tier. They were just kind of average in the dungeons. This is a good strategy that they're running. They're actually running pretty much the exact same trash pulls and strategies that Abrakeydabra is doing it, but like you mentioned it, they're just doing it pretty significantly slower, to the tune of a 20% boss health right here. So they're not dying at all. They're just going slow.
And here comes a Quaking to separate the two teams. And the two teams are the 5 players, not the two teams. They're not in the same instance. But you're absolutely right, Zyro. Like everything, it's some of the story we saw with some of the Asian teams yesterday. Everything that a lot of the West teams did in one pull, some of the East teams would do in 2 pulls, or most of the pull and then kind of one pack at the end. It's just a bit slow. Quaking pulsing here on Abrakeydabra as they finish their tantrum off. Even though we're in a fortified environment, this tantrum is very dangerous. Does a huge amount of pulsing damage on the group, and when combined with a bad Quaking, can spell disaster for someone.
Yeah, we did see a Team D was able to actually catch up there while the tantrum was going off. Of course, they'll have to deal with a tantrum of their own. And the reason that tantrum kind of stops your DPS for a bit is the boss will run all the way around the room, and you'll have to suck all of these blood maggots up. If you don't step on them, they'll spawn one of those maggots that will debuff your tank and do a lot of damage. So they kind of have to spread out and soak all of them. You even see you see 3 ticks going through right there. That could be a lot of extra damage on the group for no reason.
Zara, I don't want to be sucking up any of these ticks right now. I'd rather be stomping on them. They're absolutely disgusting. But the team does just that, and 25% here for Team D right now. They're starting, as you mentioned, to catch up just a bit. They started well above 10% difference between the two teams as the final tantrum comes in for Abrakeydabra, who's about to hit 10% on Krag'wa, and then they will rush over and start their Guardian packs. Of course, the advantage of Horde versus Lions, as we mentioned earlier, will be those Arcane Torrents should any or too many of those Blood Shields cast through. Here comes another pulse from the Quaking right now. Ab doing what he can to keep his group healthy. They actually caught up immensely. That was just a huge burst of damage as both teams actually kill Krag'wa at the exact same moment, and they'll be heading over to the trash in just a second here. Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, Abrakeydabra kind of slowed down at the end there because they ended up pulling this whole skeleton pack in with the Guardian as well. They ended up kind of cleaving it down because they knew they had the boss dead before the next tantrum. There was no reason for them to actually focus it down. So they're definitely being a lot more efficient with their damage. We keep talking about efficiency. It goes back to Cup 1, Day 1. As long as you're killing multiple things at the same time instead of one thing at a time, even if it's a boss, you're doing a better job of being efficient than the other team.
You're absolutely right here as Team D rushes in and pulls one of the Perilous Penne on this side, along with, of course, the 4 Guardians actually, and the 1 Death Speaker. Now, the Death Speaker does cast that Wicked Frenzy on them them. But the Wicked Frenzy going on one of the Guardians can actually be spell reflected by the Prot Warrior and then soothed by the rest of Druid, just getting a nice big chunk of damage on one of the skeletons and preventing a bunch of damage. No reason for these teams not to be doing that, as we see Abrakeydabra deal with their pack and they rush in, pulling the next round of Guardians plus the 2 Defilers. You already have to commit all 4 of your kicks for the 2 Defilers, meaning you're going to innately leak not only perhaps even a Raised Dead, but the Bone Shields as well.
And that's where the advantage of playing Horde comes in. They're going to be able to Arcane Torrent any of those shields, those Bone Shields on the Guardians. Now, also, did you notice that Abrakeydabra, they didn't want any pasta. They just went ahead and used one of their blinds on that. What's one of your words for it?
Menacing Macaroni.
There you go, Menacing Macaroni. They used a blind on it, they skipped it, they vanished off the aggro, and then just went ahead to this AoE pull, which, if I'm not mistaken, will be their 4th Reaping Wave, which they can just pull into the boss and AoE down once again with their priority single target damage.
That's typically what teams do. We see another Spirit Totem summoned here for the side of Team D. You just want to walk away from them, not get hit. And it seems that both teams probably purposefully are letting some of the Shadow Bolt volleys go through just so they can actually maintain a kick on the Raised Dead. Raised Dead, of course, coming from that Death Speaker that will raise another Guardian into the fray. Certainly don't want that. Abrakeydabra, once again, has started on the boss first. 82% trash as their 4th Reaping Wave pours in on top of them, and Sporecaller Zancha already sitting at 78%. We haven't even started on the boss with Team D.
There was a lot of area denial for a second there. They had all of the spores come out, plus one of the Lost Souls explosions going out. It's pretty impressive that they didn't really get hit by anything except for maybe one of the spores on one of the rogues, and I think Elsarat also ended up soaking one of the mushrooms there as well. Pretty good from them. They did have one of the Tormented Souls off to the side, just chain casting Grave Bolts in, but they were able to get it into the pack there. And now all they have to do is just kind of cleave down the rest of this trash. They don't have any of the mushrooms left for this Harvesting Frenzy here, so they won't have any massive debuffs on the group, and they're just so far ahead on the boss once again, 25% ahead on the boss here.
Yeah, very tight space, not much room to move around for these groups right now, but they just can't seem to close up this gap, Team D, that you're mentioning, Zyro. They kind of closed it up at the very end on Krag'wa, but it was at the cost of at the benefit for Abrakeydabra of grabbing the Guardians and cleaving half that pack down already. So a bit of better routing, superior strategy, if you will, here from Abrakeydabra, really putting them ahead in the dungeon. But we saw these teams go head-to-head here 2 days ago, 48 hours ago, in this very dungeon, and it was neck and neck until the very end when Ab died, unfortunately, on the trash, and then Elsarat himself died on the final boss, but he died in a late enough fashion that they were able to just 4-man the rest of the boss down. So everything really clean from the 2 teams right now, but Dr. J, speaking of which, has actually procced his cheat death, just as I said that.
Once again, same thing as what they did at the end of Krag'wa. They ended up pulling more trash into the boss so that they could cleave it down. Once they get to the point where they don't need to deal with any of the boss's mechanics, instead of dealing with a single target boss, they're cleaving some extra trash down so that they can actually get their trash percentage more efficiently done. Now, because as a result of this, Team D is going to be able to catch up on the boss, but cleaving 3 things down, same thing, is a lot better than just killing 1 thing at a time.
Cleaving 3 things down is a lot better, but what's going to happen after this is both teams are going to do a mass pull of the Guardians afterwards. So I don't know really how much they're gaining, because now we're going to have the argument of, well, Abrakeydabra is going to cleave 4 things down, when TB is going to cleave 7 things down. So we'll see exactly what they gain, and hopefully it's enough, in their opinion, Abrakeydabra, and it works out for them. But it's definitely a very aggressive strat for them, and very dangerous as well, to pull the Defiler, including that Death Speaker on top of Zancha. But they don't care. They down all 3 of those and immediately mount up, making sure not to clip each other with that Quaking, and move over to, as we mentioned, the Death Speaker and Guardian pull along with the Defiler.
The important thing to remember here is that Abrakeydabra had that 2 extra percentage that they had from their trash. We do see Team D actually doing the exact same trash pull that Abrakeydabra did. So even with that trash, I believe before the trash was killed, Abrakeydabra was at 82% trash and Team D was at 80%. They are still 2% ahead. So after these Guardian packs goes down, they will have to do a little bit different pull to the end of the dungeon if it's the same as it was on day 1. All Abrakeydabra will have to do is kill both of those 2 Corruptors at the end. Team D will have to, cleave them one of those down with one of those pasta things that you like calling them.
I love those pasta things. They might be on a diet. Maybe that's why they're skipping so many of these Raging Rigatonis. But Team D, actually, if I'm not mistaken, Team D actually grabs one of the Corruptors on top of the pack. They might end up doing it. It looks like they're not right now, but that would certainly catch them up. Otherwise, you're absolutely correct. They will have to combine it with one of those Hazard Spaghettis later. Abrakeydabra won't. They have 4% left on the board, 2% apiece from these final Corruptors that will allow them access to the final boss.
Yeah, and I mean, they're pretty massively ahead at this point. Probably about the same as they were on that final boss. If you look at the difference in that 3rd boss kill, Team D is about 25 seconds behind where Abrakeydabra is in the dungeon. And I think they're definitely dealing with this Guardian pack a lot slower than Abrakeydabra did. probably once again due to having that Arcane Torrent available on the side of Abrakeydabra, being able to just dispel off all of those Bone Shields at the same time instead of having to coordinate all of your interrupts is such a huge advantage in this dungeon.
Yeah, it is a huge advantage, and it just shows, I mean, the bosses were pretty on point for both teams right now. So it's just, in my opinion, superior routing and increased aggression, not to mention the Horde ratios on the side of Abrakeydabra were just superior, or have been superior. We've seen it. They have about a 25 to 30 second lead right now. They've dealt with the two Corruptors that are still sitting at 60% for Team D, and they're getting ready to head downstairs to combine their 5th Reaping Wave along with the final boss.
And at this point, all eyes are on Ulcerat, right? He's really the only thing that can go wrong here, short of a full team wipe. If Ulcerat dies again early on in this boss, there's no way Abrakeydabra wins this dungeon, aside from a Team D full wipe as well. He did die last time. That's got to be in the back of his head. He has to remember, I messed up here in competition last time. That can't happen again.
No, it can't happen, and these spores will one-shot you. They have about, they do about 300 HP. Now, you can survive one if you plan for it with something like an Iron Bark on yourself, but he wasn't planning for it. It spawned very close to him, and it did just finish the job. Team D is looking to do so as well as they head downstairs right now, getting ready to grab their 5th Reaping Wave on top of the Unbound Abomination, but Abrakeydabra well ahead. They only have 10 seconds left on the Bloodlust, so they're a good 30-40 seconds ahead at this point, Zyro.
And at some point here, we should see the first Blood Visages be spawning from the Unbound Abomination, which are, of course, the only way you can do damage to these boss. Every single time one of those Visages goes down, as you see it going down right now, 1/6 of the boss's health will go down. So 3 sets of 2 will equal 100% of the boss's HP, and you can see right now just how far ahead Abrakeydabra is.
Where did you learn that fancy math, Zyro? You've been holding out on me all along. Unbound A-Bomb, 66% here for Abrakeydabra. Once again, if nothing goes wrong here, Abrakeydabra should be in line to actually tie this up, leading to our first game 3, not only of the day, but of the tournament right now. Finally, we have Bloodlust fall off of Team D. They have spawned their first Visage Wave, but we already see the second Visage Wave for Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra is just 1/3 of the boss's HP ahead of Team D right now, and like we've mentioned several times at this point, they are just firmly in the lead. But we got to keep an eye on Ulcerat here. He died at this point last time, this exact point in the dungeon. He died in the last third of the boss. At this point, they'll probably still be able to finish the boss, but they're so close together that, that death could cost them.
Yeah, I mean, it will certainly cost them, but you're right. Ulcerat can actually die at this point, and they'll be able to heal through it as long as they play the mechanics properly and cleanse the dot off with that holy aura that befriends, essentially, one of the players. But the final Visage round has spawned here, and a nice, comfortable, or certainly more comfortable than last time, win here for Abrakeydabra as they tie the series up 1 apiece versus Team D.